Good afternoon, Roger.
Hello, Nathan. Thanks for inviting me.
No, thank you for making the trip all the way from London to God's country, to Derby.
Wonderful.
Yeah, you brought the southern sun with yourself. No, thank you. I really do appreciate you taking the time. And we've had a great conversation previously before the podcast. And I do really believe so many people will find so much value from this podcast in so many different ways. But I guess I do ask everybody if you could kind of start off with a short synopsis about your kind of work history from date to date, if that's all right.
Okay. Yeah, well, I've spent my whole career working in the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. By the end of this year, that's going to be 36 years. So from being a baby teacher in various different schools and working my way up, worked for 4 years at the advisory service as advisor for primary design and technology, and then deputy headship, and then headship, this is my 20th year of headship at this school. I had one acting headship beforehand, but so by the end of this one, 20 years.
Wow, 20 years is ahead.
20 years at Ripple, yeah.
That's a lot to talk about. Well, let's go for it, shall we?
Okay. And I think the main thing to say about Barking and Dagenham is I'm still there. Yeah. I've never wanted to leave. It's not the easiest place to work. Nowhere is. I know that. But we have the sixth most deprived, or I should say we have the sixth most, we've got the level of deprivation, which is the sixth most deprived borough in England. Really high mobility. My school in particular is very mobile. I think we make up something like 8% of the mobility of all primaries in my borough. And that's just the nature of being very central in the middle of the town, and families coming and going, and the volatility of the housing stock as well. Yeah. EAL, well, we've got 86% EAL, which isn't uncommon in lots of schools, although ours is very diverse. So there's 72 different languages and dialects spoken in the school. And those are just some of the pressures in terms of trying to maintain the highest standards for our children and their families. But I have to say, I absolutely love my borough. I spent my whole career waking up every morning knowing that I'm looking forward to going to work and I don't want to do it anywhere else, because that's kind of what the borough's children and families do to you. You know, they just get under your skin. Yeah,
and you've stayed in that community, and you've grown with them as well. And you've probably have you noticed generations come through as well, no doubt.
Yeah, one of my proudest moments was when I had a teacher on a course that I was presenting, and she had been in the first class that I taught as a year one child, and she was a qualified teacher coming through.
No way.
Yeah. And then you also get the children you've come through, and then you get their children coming to the school as well.
Incredible.
That started there. So
it's a nice feeling.
It is. Yeah. It's lovely. It's lovely seeing it all come full circle, definitely.
Yeah. And people keep on talking about magic moments. I bet you've got many, but I guess they are what you would call magic moments, no doubt, yeah?
Definitely. I mean, young people getting back in touch with me saying, one young lady who'd been with us, I mean, Barking, you wouldn't think it's the place where this inspiration would happen, but she completed a geology degree and was now working in that field as well. No. So it's nice that they get back to you and tell you about it.
Yeah, it's nice to feel that your students are succeeding in, I guess, in living happy lives as well. And you're a part of that, you and your team.
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to this. We're back.
Okay. Just before we start, Nathan, what I wanted to say or make really clear to anybody watching this is that I really strongly believe that because no two schools are the same, no school leader can tell another school leader how to run their school. But what I really do believe is that what we must do is take every opportunity to link up and share our practice with each other, so we can draw on everything that positively challenges and complements what we already do, and our ethos for our own schools, and help us to continually take them forward. So if you don't like what I'm saying today, well, if it's not for you, that's fine. If there's bits that you do like, then brilliant.
No, that's great. I mean, it's just promoting, collaborating, best practice. Exactly. What you do may not work for you, may not work for you, but here's how I've done it. You might take something away from it.
And I've got to say, every time I speak to other school leaders about anything like this, I also learn something.
Yeah.
Which is important.
No, It is really important.
Yeah. So anyway, on the screen at the moment, last summer I decided that I wanted to change the school motto. This previous school motto was about high aspirations, passion for learning, blah, blah, blah. And I really felt like it wasn't where we'd come to at this point in time. And what I replaced it with was declaring that we are an emotionally available school, everybody's welcome and everyone belongs. And I do actually think that it's arguably the most important educational statement that I've made in my whole career, either as a teacher or as a school leader.
That's a huge change, because would you say it's changing the culture in your school, changing, emphasising your values, the core? Yeah.
I think we already said, I've been at the school for a long time now, and it's a very different school from when I first arrived, because we have all changed in the school, and I think that's important. So when I arrived back in 2005, it was actually a school that was in a really fragile position. That the head teacher had been unwell for a long time and unfortunately passed away. I got asked by the local authority to move in as acting head from my deputy headship. And it was very clear to start with that, right from the word go, that the staff team, without any secure leadership, they began to splinter. The children's attendance wasn't great. The behaviour, actually, of the staff and the children wasn't great. The attainment wasn't great. It really wasn't a very happy school at that point in time, understandably. And I really quickly realised that I was going to be working with a group of people who weren't actually a cohesive team at that time. And it was a really fast lesson as well, in the fact that, and I'll come back to this phrase a lot, nothing happens without leadership.
Yeah.
It convinced me of that. And they'd had no clear leadership for well over a year. It all become quite cliquey and a bit bitchy, and the staff room was mostly empty. It didn't feel like a safe place for staff. It shouldn't feel like that. It should feel safe and welcoming, but it didn't feel like that, and people didn't go in there. And people walked around with their heads facing the floor, and parents didn't feel welcome, and it was clear some of the grown-ups actually didn't even like children, which wasn't a good place for a school to be. And my deputy, who arrived at the same time as I did, said to me, "What are we going to do? Where do we start?" And I responded, probably quite naively, that what we'd do is we would start with the grown-ups. And really, what I wanted to get across was, and I don't know if the phrase was right, what I actually said was, we're going to smother them with love and kindness, and the people who want to be happy will stay, and the people who don't want to be happy won't be able to take it, and they'll go away and be unhappy somewhere else. And actually, amazingly, about 18 months later, most of the unhappy people had actually left. And it started very simply, really, by me asking the grown-ups to do things like walk around with their heads held high, smiling, greeting everyone they encountered with a good morning or a good afternoon, whether it's colleagues, children, or their families. And regardless of how you're feeling yourself, I basically was insisting that it was really important for everyone that you encountered to feel welcomed into that space. And sometimes I saw things I didn't approve of and I had to tackle them, but I tried to do it as much as I could in a good-natured way. And obviously never with an audience, always just on a one-to-one. And it's actually quite interesting to find out that you can point out how mistaken somebody's been in what they've done just by out-nicing them. I was really heartened by that. And things really started to improve, which was good. But it needed some more. It needed some definition. It was more than just doing that culture in that way.
Okay, so how did you change it then? So what was your steps?
Well, like I said, without clear leadership and vision, what had once been a school of pretty good relationships had become splintered. And one of the consequences of that were there were a number of staff who tried to fill that void with their own leadership. And that inevitably led to disagreements between staff and different groups of staff, and quite a lot of ill will and ill feeling had grown out of that. And I found out, I realised that that feeling was also influencing how the staff behaved towards the children as well. I'll give you an example from really early on. There's one young man who has influenced my career all the way through from when I first met him, when I started in school leadership as a deputy head. And there have been, I call him Tony. There have been a number of Tonys, but there's one core one that really has had a major influence on me. So this is an example of what I witnessed when I first arrived. So I'm in the upper school corridor, year 5-6 building, and Tony comes, it's about 7:45 in the morning, Tony bangs through the door really loudly from the playground and comes running down the corridor, and one of the year 6 teachers steps out the classroom, sees Tony running down, having heard the door banging loudly, and literally looks at him and goes, "What do you think you're doing in here at this time, boy?" And Tony, quite rightly, I believe, took one look at him and said, "Why don't you just write off?" Yeah.
Yeah.
And he ran out again. That was it. He was gone. Teachers realised I was there, looked a bit sheepish, but then decided to go on the attack and said to me, "Did you hear what he just said to me? He can't do that. You need to exclude him." And I have to say my response at the time was, "Do you know what? If you'd approached me like that first thing this morning, I might have given you a similar response." Yeah. How dare you, you know, calling him boy, he's called Tony. That's his name. And you have no idea why he's come in like that this morning. But actually, you know, we'll talk about this later. And I need to go and find out where he is. Yeah. So I went out to the playground and I found Tony. And he was really unhappy, as you can imagine. He came in unhappy and he then had that. I managed to convince him to come to my office and sit in the comfy chair. Tony always called it the chair. But he sat down, and when he calmed down a bit, I was able to find out that the reason he'd been in school so early was that his estranged father had come round to the house the night before, had beaten up his mum in front of him and his little sister. Mum was in hospital. He didn't know how badly hurt she was. The police had come round, arrested Dad. He'd spent the night on his auntie's sofa, and he didn't know where his little sister was, and all he wanted to do was to find his teacher, arguably one of the most trusted adults in his life at that point in time, and to say, "This is what's happened," and just have some kind of help from it in the safest place he knew. And just by approaching him in that way, that teacher completely tore away all of the security that Tony had so rightly expected from his school at that point in time. So that sort of example, thankfully it wasn't common, but that was a genuine example. It struck me early on that I needed to set some clear and firm expectations for the staff. And we needed to have an agreement as to how things should be done. But I didn't want it just to be taken as a directive from the boss. I wanted things to be put forward as being seen as just a sensible and a decent way of doing things. Not just because I said so, but just because it's a good thing to do. So I decided to talk about what being a professional means and how that looks like. And it doesn't always go smoothly. You've got your vision of we're here, we're going to get to there, and actually it can take a very devious route. But one of the things you have to do, I think, is to keep an eye on where it's going and always maintain that vision. And when it drifts to one side, you come back to it. So you make sure that although you have to have some roundabout conversations at times, eventually you're coming back in line on that path that you've set yourself to take the school. And in terms of working with each other, I started dropping things into the adults like, you know what, if you've got a problem with how things are, you can deal with it in one or two ways. You can either moan about it to each other, which just makes everyone feel even more fed up and nothing will change, or you can use the line management system and raise your concerns in a professional way with someone, for example, like me, who won't just listen, but also has the ability to change things for the better. And that started to chip away and insisting on professionalism. I also started talking about certain other things like, I didn't know this quote at the time, but Maslow's hammer. Maslow said, I suppose it is tempting if the only tool you have is a hammer to treat everything as if it were a nail. And I think that's something that was happening. It was like a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching. And I had my own phrases back then that I'd used all the way through, and I don't know where I'd got them from or or why I'd come up with them, but they always worked for me in terms of my attitude from to teaching right from the time I had my first class. The first one is it's all right to get things wrong. You know, if you get things right all the time, you're just reinforcing what you already know. If you get things wrong, it gives you an opportunity to learn something new. And isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
And if you take that attitude, it starts creating a safe learning environment where children are happy to ask questions rather than just sit and listen and want to engage. The other one, which is much more like Maslow's hammer, was if you don't understand what I'm trying to teach you, don't worry. It isn't your fault. It's just that I haven't found the right way to explain it to you yet. And that started to embed itself into the school as well. And it needs lots of nudging and reminders and repetition all the time. But it did start to work. Also, I found a wonderful quote from Sai Baba. I do like a quote.
Yep.
And I introduced this. And I love this. And I'm not going to read it out because everyone can read themselves.
Yeah.
But I think it makes a really, really good point. You know?
Yeah.
What you're doing, what you're saying, does it actually improve on the silence?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
If it doesn't, don't bother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
And then I set 2 core foundations, and those were professional generosity and professional maturity. And in terms of what that means, professional generosity is about always looking out for each other and always looking after each other and always giving the benefit of the doubt, maintaining that the whole time at the highest level that you can, so that even in the most challenging of circumstances, you ask yourself why a colleague has acted in the way they did before addressing them with the what they said or done. So looking at the why before you go to the what. Yeah,
that's important.
And then professional maturity. And professional maturity is about self-management. It's about, in a nutshell, doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because you're scared of the consequences of doing the wrong thing. So, as an example, my teachers mark their books regularly because they know that they need to know where the child is for the next step in the lesson. They don't mark their books because they know I've got a book look next week and they're trying to do 5 weeks catch-up marking because they don't really be cross with them.
Yeah.
That's not the point. You do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and that's the professional way. And I think something that I learnt early on as well was, do you know what works with children also works with adults, also works with children. Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're all people, yeah? So having, I think, made a good start in addressing the behaviour of the grown-ups, I really needed to look at how we manage the behaviour of the pupils. And it didn't take long for me to realise, probably week 2, that the staff, a lot of the staff, had seen the arrival of the new acting head teacher as an opportunity to just offload their most challenging children.
Oh,
yeah,
classic.
Yeah,
Under the head.
Yes, and it also became clear that offloading was a bit of an embedded thing in terms of the school's culture. And children were turning up frequently at my office, but also around the school. It was really apparent that even more frequently, children being exited from their classrooms, usually to nowhere. You know, they might be standing outside the classroom. You know, that's probably your best scenario. Yeah. The worst scenario is they were wandering and you didn't know where they were. Just because the teacher didn't want them in there, and something had to change. And it started with me returning every child I found back to the classroom with a smile on my face and saying something like, "Oh, hello, miss," or "Hello, sir. I just found Tony outside. I brought him back to you." And what are they going to do? You know, I've brought them back in. I've reintroduced the child to the class. It's nobody's undermined. It's a big smile on the face, but actually the points are made. That child shouldn't be outside. They're in your care. They should be in there. Yeah. And after a few weeks of this, I had a staff meeting where I made it clear that it's not going to happen anymore. And at the same time, I had a word about the number of children being sent to my office, which was along the lines of, if you send a child to me, then I'll work with them and build a relationship with them and they'll behave for me. But they probably won't behave for you when I send them back. If you want them to behave for you, you need them to be working with you and you need to be working with them and building that relationship for yourself. And then they'll start behaving for you. Deal with it yourself. If you send them out to me, it's not going not going to do any good.
Yeah.
In the long term.
Yeah. You're going to get that relationship there, not.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, light bulb moments. I got my first hint that it was all starting to work when I started to hear the things I kept saying coming back to me around the school, and that's really refreshing, really good. So, for example, a member of staff was relaying to me that a colleague had snapped at them that morning, but they hadn't snapped back. And in her words, and I love this, she said, because you don't know what's happened outside of school, maybe their dog just died. And in a really sort of basic way, I thought, yeah, you've got it.
Yeah.
You get it. You understand what I'm on about. And the tone in the classroom started changing, faster in some places than others, obviously. But classroom interactions were moving from, I know what you need to know, so you better sit up and listen, and moving to, are you having trouble with that? Let's have a look at it together. And that collaborative approach to teaching and learning, which I think it epitomises what primary school teaching should be about. Yeah. Sure, all teaching should be about. And I had no idea back then, Nathan, that no formalised concept that these key principles were actually the foundation of what would develop further and become what we know as a nurture-based and trauma-informed practice. I mean, very embryonic.
Yeah.
But we weren't doing it in education back in 2005, particularly. Yeah. Social care were all over it. They were always trauma-informed from back before then. But in terms of education, we hadn't really started to get our heads around it. But it was a starting point, and I'd say it maybe took 3 years before it started becoming embedded with the majority of the school culture. And by embedded, I mean second nature. Yeah. Just doing it without thinking about it. Yeah. Things just happening the right way because we had a consensus in our school that it was the right way for it to happen. Doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Yeah. And the thing that really made it work, I think, was an approach for everyone. It was made clear that what we were building was as much about the well-being of the staff team as it was about the pupils, as it was about their families as well. And I've got to say, 19 years on, I won't say we're there. Yeah. I won't say we're there, but I'm confident we're really well on the way to being a very safe and supportive school for all of our staff and their children, the children and their families. And I'm not saying we haven't got a way to go even after all this time. But what I can say is I can't remember the last time that I heard an adult in our school raise their voice to a child. We just don't do it like that anymore. We just don't, and we haven't done for years. So.
And why?
Well, I think it was really about establishing a consensus. As with all change and development, it's taken a while, not just to formalise the vision, but more importantly, to embed it holistically across the school. Yeah. And it happens most effectively when the whole team has believed in it being the right thing to do. Yeah. Coming back to that, so important, doing the right thing, the professional maturity, doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Yeah. And I think you need to acknowledge that if you're going to do anything in terms of school change and development and improvement, you have got to identify all the needs and address them with the highest possible level of best practice support to allow everyone on the team to continue to develop their skills in every aspect of their professional duties. Yeah. And alongside that, it's also vital to do everything that you can to secure their well-being. And to do that, you've got to actually walk the walk every single day. You have got to be the role model for what you want the school to become. Yeah. Because if you let that slip, everybody else will let it slip because they'll think, oh, well, it's all right for him not to do it. Yeah. He's the boss.
Say as I say, not as I do type of thing. Yep.
Absolutely.
As I say, sorry, yep.
So, there's times when you might have to have a difficult conversation with a member of staff. But to be honest, it's a lot easier to have that difficult conversation with that member of staff if you and they know that even though things may have not worked out for you and them in that school, you've done everything in your power to support them before that conversation happened. And I think the reason for highlighting that is to emphasise that all effective change management and development, it happens slowly. And as I said earlier, I come back to it, and it doesn't happen without leadership. It has to be led. It's leadership that establishes the core ethos, the vision, the culture of the school. It's leadership that drives the school's continual development. And it's leadership that secures the consensus across the whole team. But as leaders, we must always understand that it's not just because you think it's the right way. And I've got a phrase that I like, which is you don't reach a consensus by sitting around a harmonious table. Yeah? You need to have the opportunity for lots of different opinions to be voiced. Yeah. You need the confidence to take your ideas to the group and ask them where they can see anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
I'm not always right.
Yeah.
Can you see the flaws? It's healthy to do that. You need your team to be able to do the same with you. There needs to be equity, trust, safety. Important that everyone feels safe to do that.
Yep.
So everyone accepts there's no such thing as a bad idea. Just ideas that can challenge and be challenged. And only once you've had all of those conversations can you say that you've got a consensus.
You know what's striking out to me as you're talking? You that slide where you said what works with adults works with children, adults with children. You're literally talking about how you are not blaming the staff for not getting, let's say, how the new way. You're talking about including your staff, and you're trying to find different ways and get to know your staff in order for them to get on board with you. Mm-hmm. Exactly what you're telling them to do with the children.
Yeah,
you're not saying this is my way. This is exactly the template. This is going to work. You know, you're getting to know your staff and how to communicate with each one of them. You know, cohesion, your vision, and also all the this way you want to be, and. It's literally what you were just talking about.
And your consensus doesn't have to be incredibly narrow.
Yeah.
It can be broad,
okay.
Not too broad, obviously, because too broad isn't a consensus. But once you've had those conversations and you've talked it around and you said, yeah, this is the way we're going to do it. Actually, once everyone's had a chance to have their say and you've established this is the way we've got to do it, that's when you say, okay, that's the way we are going to do it. We've agreed that as a team now.
Yeah.
And then we stick to that until we find a reason to challenge it again later.
Yeah.
But that's important as well. So if we have a staff meeting and we talk something through and we say, okay, that's the way we're going to do it, fair enough. My expectation at that point is because we've developed it through a collegiate approach and everyone's had an opportunity to have their say, and then we've all said, okay, we've decided, then I don't expect it to be done drastically different to that. You know?
Fair enough. Yeah.
Which I think is reasonable.
Yeah.
I talked about trauma-informed practice, and I've introduced a number of different things over different concepts and models to the staff over a period of time. But I'd say one of the most influential was this. It's the assessment framework, and social workers have used it since way back in 1989, 90, when the key document, Working Together to Safeguard Children, was first published.